Moving into a new house is always an adventure, but for my siblings and me, it was more like a nightmare. We had just relocated to a small, creaky, old house in the countryside. The place had a creepy vibe, and the towering, ancient trees that surrounded it only added to the eerie atmosphere. My name is Alex. I was 13 at the time. My younger siblings, Emily and Jacob, were 10 and 8. The first few weeks in the new house were relatively normal, as we unpacked boxes and explored our new surroundings. But one day, while rummaging through the attic for old toys, we stumbled upon an unsettling discovery. Tucked away in a dusty corner of the attic, we found a worn and weathered Ouija board. None of us had ever used one before, but we had heard the stories. The board seemed to beckon to us, promising a thrilling adventure that we couldn't resist. "Come on, guys," I said, my voice trembling with excitement and trepidation. "Let's give it a try." Emily hesitated, but then nodded eagerly, and Jacob, always eager to prove himself, agreed as well. We placed the board on the attic floor, and the three of us sat in a circle around it. The planchette, a small heart-shaped piece of wood, rested in the center. We placed our fingertips lightly on it, and I took a deep breath. "Is there anyone here with us?" I asked, trying to sound brave. At first, nothing happened. The planchette remained still, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Maybe the stories were just tales to scare kids. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the planchette began to move. My heart raced as I watched it spell out the word, Y-E-S. We exchanged nervous glances. None of us were moving it, and it was impossible for the planchette to be spelling out words on its own. The air in the attic grew colder, and I could see my breath. "What's your name?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. The planchette moved again, spelling out the name, Samuel. "Samuel? Are you a ghost?" Jacob asked, his eyes wide with wonder and fear. The planchette spelled out, "Yes." We were in over our heads, but the curiosity had a hold on us that we couldn't break. We continued to ask questions, learning that Samuel had once lived in the house and had died tragically. The story was chilling, and we could feel the presence of something otherworldly in the room. "Can you show us a sign of your presence?" I asked nervously. The planchette moved to yes, and then suddenly lightning flashed and thunder rumbled, shaking the old house to its foundations. The lights in the attic flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. We huddled together, our hearts pounding. That's when we heard it. The sound of fingernails clawing, slow and deliberate, creeping closer and closer. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no reply, only the sound of the clawing growing louder. I could feel a presence in the room with us, something unseen, but undeniably there. Just as I was about to suggest we make a run for it, the planchette on the Ouija board began to move again, spelling out a message in frantic, desperate strokes. H-E-L-P. My siblings and I exchanged terrified glances. Whatever was in the room with us, it was not Samuel. It was something else, something dark. The clawing grew louder, and then we saw it. A shadowy figure standing at the far end of the attic. It was a silhouette, indistinct and shapeless, but its presence was suffocating. We collectively screamed, scrambled to our feet, and made a run for the attic door. As we descended the creaking staircase, we could hear footsteps following us, getting closer with each passing moment. We burst out of the attic and slammed the door shut behind us, but the footsteps and clawing didn't stop. They continued to pursue us throughout the house, echoing through the empty halls. In a moment of panic, we stumbled upon a small, dusty room in the basement. It was a cramped space filled with old books and relics. We hid there, huddled together in fear. The footsteps drew nearer and nearer, and then they stopped just outside the door. We held our breath, praying that whatever was out there would go away. But then, a voice cold and chilling whispered through the crack, beneath the door.
"You should not have awakened me."
The three of us clung to each other, tears streaming down our faces as the voice continued to speak, promising a fate worse than death. We had played with forces beyond our understanding, and now we were paying the price. The Ouija board had unlocked a doorway to something that would haunt our nightmares for the rest of our lives. And as we cowered in that dark, forgotten room, we could only hope that one day we would find a way to escape the horror we had unleashed. The toy store had always been a place of wonder and delight for me. Rows of colorful dolls, action figures, and board games lined the shelves, each promising hours of fun and adventure. But on that day, as I wandered the aisles in search of the perfect gift for my niece's birthday, the cheerful facade of the toy store was about to unravel. I had just picked up a rag doll when my gaze fell upon a dusty corner of the store. There, tucked away amidst forgotten toys and discarded board games, was an old Ouija board. Its wooden surface was weathered and worn, and the letters and numbers were faded. It was an unexpected find in a place meant for children's joy. My curiosity got the better of me, and I reached for the Ouija board. As my fingers brushed its surface, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, remembering the stories about the dangers of such games, but I brushed them aside as superstitions. The Ouija board felt heavy in my hands as I carried it to the checkout. The cashier, a young woman with a friendly smile, raised an eyebrow at my choice. "Interesting pick," she said. I laughed awkwardly, dismissing her comment as I paid and left. That night, after the birthday celebration, I couldn't resist the urge to try out the Ouija board. Everyone had gone and I was alone in the dimly lit living room. I set the board on the coffee table, lit a candle, and placed my fingertips on the wooden planchette. "Is there anyone here with me?" I asked. For a moment, the planchette remained still and I actually felt relieved. But then slowly, it began to move, spelling out the word YES. A shiver ran down my spine as I watched in disbelief. My heart raced and I asked, "Who are you?" The planchette spelled out the name Val. "Val, are you a spirit?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The planchette moved again, spelling out yes. I continued to ask questions, learning that Val had once owned the Ouija board. The story was chilling, and I could feel a presence in the room. "Can you show me a sign of your presence?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The planchette moved to yes and then spelled out BEHINDYOU. I froze, and as I turned around slowly, the candle in the room went out, leaving me in complete darkness. Panic swept over me as I fumbled for my phone's flashlight. As I shakily illuminated the room, I realized I was no longer alone. The temperature dropped. Shadows seemed to shift into a sinister figure at the center of the room. Val? She appeared as a spectral, ethereal form, her eyes burning with anger and resentment. She pointed an accusing finger at me, her voice a ghostly whisper that echoed in my head.
"You are next,"
she hissed. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled backward. I had played with fire, and I was about to feel the burn. Suddenly, I screamed in terror as Val's shadowy form lunged toward me, her icy touch sending shockwaves of agony through my body as she passed through me. I awoke with a start, gasping for breath. It was all a dream, a terrible nightmare. But as I sat up in bed, I could feel the lingering chill in the room, and I knew that the Ouija board had brought something sinister into my life. I had ventured into the unknown, and the scars of that night would haunt me for the rest of my days. The weekend getaway was supposed to be a carefree escape from the pressures of our busy lives. 6 friends in our early 30s, we had rented a secluded Airbnb in the woods. It was a charming rustic cabin with all the modern amenities. Little did we know, our carefree retreat would turn into a nightmare. The first night was a blur of laughter and clinking glasses. We brought enough alcohol to stock a small bar, and we were determined to have a good time. The cabin was cozy, the fireplace crackling, and we reveled in the feeling of isolation from the rest of the world. As the night wore on and our inhibitions lowered, someone suggested playing with the Ouija board they had found in the cabin. It was a foolish idea, but fueled by alcohol and the promise of excitement, we agreed. We gathered around the Ouija board, our fingers lightly resting on the planchette. The atmosphere was tense as we asked, "Is there anyone here with us?" For a moment, nothing happened. We exchanged skeptical glances, half expecting nothing to occur. But then, almost imperceptibly, the planchette began to move, spelling out HELLO. A wave of nervous laughter rippled through the group, but it couldn't mask our unease. Someone asked, "Who are you?" The planchette spelled out the name Steve. "Steve, are you a spirit?" Another friend inquired, her voice quivering. "Yes," the planchette spelled out. We were all caught in a whirlwind of emotions: fear, excitement, disbelief. The Ouija board had come to life, or so it seemed. We continued to ask questions, and Steve revealed that he had once lived in the cabin and had met an untimely end. The details were sketchy, but it sent shivers down our spines. As we conversed with this supposed spirit, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The fire flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The once welcoming cabin now felt oppressive. With trembling fingers, we asked, "Steve, can you show us a sign of your presence?" The planchette moved to yes, and then spelled out WINDOW. We looked at the window and gasped. Beyond the glass, the night had grown impossibly dark. The trees outside swayed ominously in the wind, and the moon was hidden behind thick clouds. Then, the lights in the cabin flickered and went out, leaving us in darkness. Panic swept over us as we fumbled for flashlights and candles. As we struggled to regain our composure, a bone-chilling wind blew through the cabin. It was as if the very essence of the forest outside had infiltrated our sanctuary. "Did anyone leave a window open?" I asked, my voice shaking. "No," someone replied, their voice trembling. The room was now illuminated only by the faint glow of the candles we had hastily lit. We huddled together, our breath visible in the cold air. And that's when we heard it. The sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. My heart pounded as we listened to the footsteps draw closer. Someone whispered, "Who's there?" There was no response, only the eerie sound of the footsteps approaching. It was then that we realized we were not alone. We had invited something in, something that was now lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, the planchette on the Ouija board began to move again, spelling out a message in frantic strokes, HELPME. We knew we had to leave the cabin, to get away from whatever dark force was closing in on us, but we were paralyzed with fear. Just as we were about to make a run for it, a voice cold and sinister echoed through the cabin. It seemed to come from all directions, filling the room with an otherworldly presence. "You should not have awakened me," it hissed. We watched in horror as the candles flickered and died, plunging us into absolute darkness. The voice continued to speak, promising a fate worse than death. In a blind panic, we stumbled through the blackness, searching for an exit. The footsteps grew closer, and we could feel an evil presence closing in on us. In the pitch-black darkness, we tripped over furniture and crashed into walls. I could hear my friends crying out in terror, their voices echoing in the void. Then, as suddenly as it had all begun, the darkness lifted. We found ourselves outside the cabin, gasping for breath and trembling with fear. The cabin, once so inviting, now stood before us like a sinister sentinel in the woods. We didn't stop to gather our belongings. We simply ran, never looking back. To this day, we don't speak of that night. We know we encountered something beyond our comprehension, something that should have remained undisturbed. The Ouija board had been a catalyst for unimaginable horror, and we had paid the price for our reckless curiosity. As we made our way back to the real world, we couldn't help but wonder if Steve had ever been real or if he had been a disguise for something far more sinister, something that had lured us into its grasp. One thing was certain: that cabin had become a place of nightmares.